can't see the date. I'd like to call to order the Board of Education meeting. It's September 24th, 2019. Let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to appoint Mr. Ziegler, President Pro Treasurer. Tim.
All right, take the roll call. Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler? Yes. Mr. Dosen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes.
And we're all here.
Okay, item 2. I'd like to enter into executive session. May I have a motion?
Second.
Okay.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ziegler? Yes. Mr. Dosen?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. This motion to enter into executive session is for the consideration of the appointment, employment, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official per Board Policy 0166, Item A. We will now be in executive session. No new business will be conducted. And I have a motion to reconvene our regular meeting at 7 p.m. Okay. Item 4, recognition, presentation. We have the recognition and presentation by Mrs. Magyar.
Yes, thank you. So we are going to recognize our commended and national merit scholars, and I'm going to have Mrs. Walsh come up here and help with the presentation. You could talk a little bit about what these kids have accomplished.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and it's so nice to be here this evening to share with you. The National Merit Scholarship Program has been in existence for many, many years. We have had about 66 years worth of National Merit finalists and commended scholars. So every year almost that the program has been in existence, we have had recognition here with some folks in our district. That is amazing because in the country and in the state of Ohio, in the country, to have a school or a high school have one student recognized is quite an accomplishment every few years. But to have this number of students, I believe we have 14 here this evening, which is amazing. These students are in the top 0.5% of all of the test takers in the country who took the test, the PSAT test, in their junior year in the fall. So they are wonderful scholars, and I know most of these kids, and they're wonderful human beings. So I know parents tonight are very proud, and we're so happy to be able to recognize you this evening. So, okay. Sure. Okay, Nicole Floors. Is Nicole here? Okay. Okay. Just get up here, yeah. Shannon Leiden. Congratulations. Oops, that's okay. Erica Nye. See Erica? Okay. And Catherine Schwen. Mark Yassine. Mark here? Mark.
We have a couple kids that are playing in a soccer game that are going to come back next month, and he was one of them, yes.
Mia Zipkovic. Is Mia here? She may have a name too. Jack Kratian. Is Jack here? Yes. Megan Kumar. Dale Marsh. yours. And Liam McCafferty. And Travis Smith. Austin Bullweiler. And Tiffany Wang. And Kevin Williams. Oh, Nicole, come on up, Nicole.
At the bottom.
Yes. Thank you.
So Maggie, do you want to get a picture? Before you guys go, can all of you come back up, we'll take a picture real quick. Okay, in there.
Girls from tennis are coming over. They just finished a match against Hathaway Brown. Erica and Nye and Mia Zivkovic.
Okay.
Can I
We
should
will
get them in here?
start, absolutely.
Let me get them in here.
How about, are they here right now?
They're on their way from the courts right down here. I'll just-
How about if we do our other presentation, if you guys can wait 5 minutes?
That would be
Because
great.
You'll probably want to.
Thank you so much. I apologize. I just running late.
No, thank you
Thank you.
for letting us know. So I'm going to move on to the next presentation. So I need to share a story with you, and you'll understand after I share the story why we are recognizing some very special people this evening. Actually, it's almost been about 3 weeks ago, a parent had come to the high school to attend a meeting about their child. The parent went into cardiac arrest during this meeting in our conference room at the high school. That parent, we were able to grab our school nurse. Our school nurse, Lisa, performed CPR on that parent. In the meantime, we had to go locate the AED machine in our high school and bring it to Lisa. Lisa administered the AED machine, and in the meantime, the staff at the high school had called 911, and our first responders from Broadview Heights had responded. By the time they got there, Lisa was still performing CPR and using the AED machine. They came in and took over. This parent needed to be shocked back to life twice in our conference room. The parent was then transported to the hospital, where the parent was put into a coma to lower the body temperature, which, if that parent had the fortunate ability to wake up, that it would minimize the amount of brain damage that was done to this parent. This was on a Thursday, and Monday, I was getting ready to leave for Columbus, and I was stopped in my tracks at the door because this parent, who had just went into cardiac arrest on Thursday, walked through the board office door to thank me for the heroic efforts of our staff and the Broadview Heights first responders. I've never been so excited to see somebody standing in front of me. And what the doctors had shared and what our first responders had shared, that if it wasn't for the efforts of Lisa, and if it wasn't for that quick response, that parent wouldn't be here with us today. That parent later told me that they were given a 10% chance of living when they got to the hospital. So, I am honored to thank you and to thank all of our Broadview Heights first responders who did what they do every day, put their life second and put somebody else's life first. And it's because of you that 3 children still have their parent today. And this certificate is not even close to the appreciation that I have for all of you. And we just wanted to publicly thank you for doing what you do. So Lisa.
there because I keep getting the recognition, and really it was a team effort. And it might not be appropriate here, but I also think it was God's plan that everybody was in the right place at the right time. And Jose, thanks for the moral support there.
Absolutely. Awesome.
But really, like Susan was on the phone, it really was a joint effort, but I was glad I was there. Thank you. We were too.
So thank you. So. And speaking of that team effort, we'd like to recognize our Broadview Heights first responders that also responded to that call. So Mike Franco. Dan Schreiber. Matt Conklin.
Most of those guys are on shift. They're actually on a call now. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Brian Burke. Where's Jose? Jose Garcia. Sergeant Rob Novotny. Joe Fleming. Al Leonard. Thank you. Thank you all.
I think we have a lady upstairs. Do we want to circle
Oh,
back?
yes, we have to circle back. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
We have some of our tennis players who just came in.
Mia? Congratulations.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
We were, if you ladies can stay up here, we're going to take a picture now with all of you. Come back, take a picture.
Mrs. Welch, you want to stay up there as well?
There you go.
I'm so All right, ready? Smile. Brains and beauty. Perfect. You guys, congratulations.
Yeah, good work.
Congratulations, parents. Amazing scholars. Please fill in, take a seat. You want to move up?
Front row's wide open.
Front, oh yeah, front row. Ladies, do you want a seat? Come rest for a little bit after your match. Come on. So we're going to have item A, state report card presentation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is David Martin. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning. And I'm going to attempt to explain the state report card to you tonight in accessible and comprehensible terms. Because guess what? It's the state and it's rocket science. So I'm not going to get too complicated, but it is rocket science. I'm going to try to explain it in a very accessible way. I think first and foremost, we have to celebrate. We had an improvement in our performance index. We are ranked 7th in the state. That is cause for celebration. It is the second highest performance index we've had. Oh, thank you. It's the second. Hold your applause to the end. It's the second highest performance index we've had since 2003. And it shows the growth of the students, and I'm going to explain the performance index shortly here. It shows the growth of the students from one performance level to the next. So we're seeing some very good trends. With that being said, this is a snapshot of what we do. This is a snapshot of the performance of our students, the hard work of our staff, and our administration. So let's jump right into performance index here. Just so everybody knows how it's calculated. Again, I'll try to keep this as simple as possible. So there are 6 performance levels. The highest is Advanced Plus, and that's for students that are taking exams that are off grade, high. So we had 7.2% of our students earned an Advanced Plus, and there's a multiplier there, which earned us 9.3 points. And as you go down, you can see there was 38.2% advanced, accelerated 28.6, 19.1, etc. You guys, a performance index here of 108.1. To go back to what I was talking about before, and this is where the real excitement is, and this is what we all should be celebrating. If you look at our trend from 2015 on, there's a steady increase in our performance index. That's good. The perfect score is 120, and the highest one in the state is 112. So, you know, we're doing well. But this is what I want to show you. So this one up here, the baby blue one at the top. This is last year, 2018. 9.2% of our students earned the Advanced Plus. Okay, and then in 2019, 9.3. That's good. We want these top ones to grow. We want them to get bigger, and we want the ones on the bottom to get smaller, and you'll see shortly why. So again, we've had an increase of Advanced Plus last year, this year. This is Advanced, 42.8 in 2018 to 45.9 in 2019, so that's good. That's good movement. This is Accelerated, which is still good, 29.9 last year, and there was a slight decrease to 29.3. Well, that could mean that these students moved up to Advanced or Advanced Plus. Proficient last year, 19.9. Now it's 19.1. Still commendable, but it's safe to say that the students are moving up the performance ranking. And then we have Basic, 4% last year, so we want these to decrease to 3.9% this year. And then the last performance level is Limited, 1%. We want this to decrease. We want to move kids up to 0.7. So that's good news, and that's cause for celebration.
Mr. Martin, Advanced Plus is which population? What does that mean?
Mostly kids that are taking off grade, meaning above if you're in
They're accelerated.
Accelerated math,
Right.
mostly, yeah, taking accelerated math. Okay. Let's go to this document here, and this just gives you some historical perspective. So again, I've been tracking this since 2003. We started at a 102.2, and we are now at a 108.1, which is 7th in the state. This is, comparable rankings. 35 in 2014-15. There was no ranking in the state, and 15-16. 11 to 14 to 7. So cause for celebration there. Just briefly glance over this. These are all the performance by grade level and subject. As you'll see, lots of 90s, mid-90s. So we're really doing well there. That's 3 through 8, plus all subjects, math, except for social studies. So math, ELA, and science in 5th and 8th grade, and then 7 end-of-course exams at high school. Okay. Let's go a little fast down here. This is where I'm going to go to next. So this is how we got our overall grade, and we'll be seeing these when we go back to the report card. Achievements 20%, progress is 20%, graduation rate, gap closing, improving K-3 readers, and prepare for success for all at 15%. Okay, so back to achievement. This is 20% of our overall grade. And if we go into performance index, as we saw, there are 2 components. The performance index is weighted at 75%, and meeting all the indicators is weighted at 25%. As you'll notice here, 23 out of 24 indicators were met. There was one indicator that we did not meet, and I'll explain why. That was the gifted indicator, which was interesting. So we'll click on that, and we'll find out what was going on here. So you see our performance index overall was 108.1. But if you just extrapolate the students that are qualified as gifted, their performance index is 121,539. So pretty high up there. We have our value added, meaning how much did our gifted students grow. They earned an A there. That was met. The performance index was met for gifted, but our gifted inputs was not met. So we earned 79 points out of 80. We missed it by 1 point. And the reason why we missed it is because you have to identify a certain amount of students that are economically disadvantaged, visually creative, performing arts, and I think there's another one.
Creativity?
What's that?
Did you say creativity?
Yeah, there's creative thinking, visual arts, visual
Minority.
performance or something.
Yeah, minority.
What? Say,
Minority.
yeah, minority as well. But the one we really missed out on was the performing arts, the visual arts, creative thinking. So we missed it there. But
Mr. Martin, we can do something about that though, right? Very easily.
yeah, yes, we can. Because there's identifying and then there's serving. So we missed out on the identifying and the serving. Okay. So that's 20% where we earn an A. The progress is 4 through 8, value added, and some end of course. Now I will warn you that I called the state today, still do not have the current value added data up on the website. It's here. It's still 2018, so they don't have it. We'll go back to that. But if you look at our progress, our overall progress was B, but our component grade was an A because of 2 strong components. Our gifted students' growth, 4 through 8, and end of course, and our students with disabilities, their growth in 4 through 8, and end of course, were very, very strong. An A is right here. So students made more progress than expected. Students made more progress than expected. Significant evidence. Students made more progress than expected. Moderate evidence. students made progress similar to the statewide expectations. So this essentially, a C, is making 1 year's growth, above 1 year's growth, well above 1 year's growth. And you can see here, we did achieve that with gifted students, students with disabilities. Students in the lowest 20% also made growth, on average 1 year's growth, but they received a C for that, which got us an overall grade of B. And then our progress, because the overall is 55%, and these are weighted at 50% each. Okay, so gap closing is weighted at 15%, and this is really looking at the subgroups. Racial minorities, economically disadvantaged, EL students, what else do we have in there? Students with disabilities, racial minorities, EL, all students. Yeah. So for, this is ELA, and these are all grades, all tested subjects. The state sets the red dot, that's the goal here. So the goal with students with disabilities in English language arts is 59.6, as you can see. We did very well in English language arts across the district in this subgroup, in this tested subject area, in all the subgroups. Similar story in math. We did very, very well. Again, the red dot is what the state sets as the goal, and we exceeded that goal fairly well. Graduation rate, we did well, except for one area, which is students with disabilities. The goal is 73.8, and we achieved a 69%. So we did receive an automatic demotion for that. That was a 10-point demotion on our report card. But the other areas, we did fairly well. Okay. Graduation rate, again, this is the state measures the 4-year graduation and 5-year graduation, both very high, 95.5 and 98.9. Improving at-risk K-3 readers. We have been at this level for some time now. In fact, I don't think we've ever changed out of the C grade, but this is our highest percentage we've achieved since we began measuring K-3 readers, our average readers. So 47%, which was compared to last year, we had a 41%. This is cause for celebration as well. We had 18 RIMP deductions. Last year we have 6 this year. A RIMP deduction is a reading improvement monitoring plan. And if you are not on those and you do not pass the 3rd grade reading guarantee, we get an automatic demotion or deduction for that. But we did a good job. We didn't put everyone on a RIMP, but we did a good job really honing in with the data and figuring out who needed that RIMP and who needed that extra monitoring. So this is pretty much what we have. There's sort of tricks to this thing, because if we use a different diagnostic, we might get different results. We use iReady, and iReady goes from fall to fall. So the only way you can get off a RIMP, a reading improvement monitoring plan, and decrease the amount that are off task is by scoring higher the subsequent fall than you did the year before. So for example, if you're a 1st grader and you're off track and you take the fall diagnostic the following year in 2nd grade, you're expected to do better. So it's a little counterintuitive, fall to fall. What would conventional wisdom would be, let's measure them fall to spring, but this is what the state says, and this is what we're doing. So we're trying to grow kids on a fall to fall basis. But it also depends on the diagnostic you use. But we're moving in the right direction. Okay. I want to point something out too. There's a little notation here, and it's prepare for success data subject to change due to local reporting error. Contact district for more, so you can contact me if you want more information. We had a reporting error. Well, we're still trying to figure out really what happened, but this number should be much higher. The way Prepare for Success is calculated, it's a 2-year cohort combined total, and this is for graduating classes of 17 and 18. And if you look up here, 488 students. Okay, this is the number of students that earned a remediation-free score on all parts of the ACT or SAT, earned an honors diploma, and or earned an industry recognized credential. So ACT and SAT remediation free. You can look over here. If you earn an 18 on English, a 22 on math, and a 21 on reading sections of ACT, that's a remediation free score. For SAT, it is a 430 on writing, a 450 on reading, and a 420 on math. So if you do all of these, or one of these, you'll get 1 point. And that'll get you to the bonus round, which is the next thing that I need to explain. We had a lot more than 74 students take an AP exam. If you take an AP exam, you get 3 or higher, you get an extra 0.3. Now, some of you high school students know that that's not right. We got way more than 74 students taking an AP exam. We calculated it at close to 300. So we had to track down the error. It was loaded, but we got a watermark on our report card for that, and we're taking action and moving forward. But it would have been much higher instead of 75.8, which is close to a C. And look at this grading scale. 93 to 100 is an A. 75 to 92.9 is a B. We would have had 88.5% had we been able to correctly report our close to 300 AP students that earned a 3 or higher. All right. So again, 20%, 20%, 15, 15, 15, overall grade of a B. And I want to go quickly back to our document and scroll up a little bit and maybe get some thoughts on this. So what I was able to do is I took the top 20 school districts ranked in the state of Ohio, and I was able to rank them on performance index and our overall grade. And you see we set at number 7 right here. We're at 37.25 for our enrollment. So it's comparable to Solon. We're a little smaller. We're much bigger. We're 1,000 more than Rocky River. But if you can look, and there's some similarities with these districts. And some of you probably don't know some of the other districts. I went to Toledo, so I know Ottawa Hills. That's a tiny district, 981 students, kind of easier to manage. But all of these districts have something in common. And what Cleveland.com did, this is an interesting article. I couldn't get the graph to show up here because it took all 608 school districts in the state of Ohio and compared their median household income with their performance index, meaning where did they stand on their median household income and how they did. So you can see here, average for districts receiving each grade. Obviously, if there is a higher median household income, the probability of earning an A or a higher A or B is much greater. So they mentioned Steubenville. Steubenville was ranked 520 out of 608 districts on median household income, so kind of a poor district, but yet they were ranked 39th on the performance index. So they're really overachieving. They ranked Lakewood in Cuyahoga County. It's like 420 out of 608, but they ranked, notes here, I believe it was 192nd on the performance index. So it's interesting to see that comparison there. Cleveland.com is the first one to admit that's not a scientific study, it's not scientific data, but it is an interesting comparison. And the state will also say that there's inherent error in their report card as well. So
I appreciate that you brought that to everybody's attention. It just points out that it's not really a level playing field in the state of Ohio, and that they aren't putting a test or anything on that intangible, which is the advantages that, you know, our district and other districts share. And so, unfortunately, you know, those communities end up feeling like they're failures, and I know that they're not. They're trying as best as they can, and they have a lot of other things they're doing as well, so thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. I taught in this Commonwealth schools for 9 years, and there's some phenomenal teachers
Yeah.
that I would want my own children to have, but they don't get
I
recognized.
taught in Mount Healthy, which is the second worst in the state, so, yeah,
Yeah, you know.
it's rough.
So, that's it. Any questions? You're all still here. I didn't scare anybody away.
I would just like to add, Dave, thank you for the information. You know, as we look at this report card data, for us it's a data point, and that's all it is. You know, as your superintendent, I will tell you that I don't put a lot of stock in our overall grade, because as Dave pointed out, I think very well, is that grade is dependent not on how we did. If you look at purely how we did well, but because of the way the state uses a tool to monitor us and, you know, hold us accountable, you know, you have to take demotions for certain things, and you have to, so there's many other things that play into a grade. As Dave pointed out, at-risk readers, a C, that's all we're able to get. And it's not because our teachers are not doing fantastic things, as evident by the at-risk reading grade is supposed to measure how many kids you start off that are not on track to on track. And what the on track is to is whether or not you're able to pass a third grade reading test. We have 100% of our kids pass the third grade reading test, but yet according to the way that the state is marking us, we're only making adequate growth with those kids. Clearly we're making more than adequate growth because they're all passing the test. So when we look at the report card, we look at it in context as a data point, but not something that we're going to, you know, change the way in which we teach and the way we interact with your children. The things that we're doing and looking at the whole child and concerned about mental health, and clearly we're providing, you know, a high level of education for your kids, despite what our report card says. And so I just need to add that, because we don't fall on this. We've had some phone calls to say, how is it that you got to be overall? Well, we got to be overall because of a calculation, not because of what we're doing in the classroom. Our performance index is really the indicator to say we take kids where they are and we're making growth with them. And you as parents, that's what you would want. You'd want us to grow your kids. And clearly we are doing that by our performance index measure. And some of those other marks in the report card are just a dipstick of a point in time of where our kids are at and a function of the tool that the state uses to hold us accountable. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Stroud. All right, so we're going to move on to B, our tennis court discussion, and I found Mr. Reynolds over there, so I feel ready to go, right? So let's circle back about 2 weeks. We had a meeting, a public meeting, I should say, with our tennis parents, and we offered an option of the board building new tennis courts at the city. We talked, and I thought it was a wonderfully transparent and collaborative effort, and we came to the conclusion that that necessarily wasn't the option that the tennis parents were wishing to pursue. So we discussed some other options, one of which was, you know, could we resurface? The second one, the third one was, you know, do we want to fundraise and just scrap all this idea? So we agreed to do some homework on our end, and Mr. Code, thank you very much. He, right there we go, and did some work involving Mr. Reynolds and Mrs. Magyar as well, and Mr. Maslana. You did some homework as we asked you to do. I asked Mr. Reynolds to go back to his parents once he had all the information he needed and to kind of find out what they wanted. And so that's how we find ourselves here today. Talking, you know, the board has had very little discussion other than what we've been told by Mr. Code. So we would like to hear what the thoughts are of the tennis parents first, of course, and then, you know, the board would please chime in with any discussions or questions for Mr. Code. So, all right, Mr. Reynolds.
Okay. after our meeting that we had, the idea, like, for me personally, the idea of all of the parents pretty much, it was pretty unanimous that having the courts at the City Hall site, building those 2 courts off away from the 3 that are currently there was not the most optimal decision, because you have separation of a group of 3 where you would have singles play, I assume, and then a group of 2 where you would have doubles playing. Being that it was located behind a baseball field, you couldn't see one bank of courts from the other, so that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to coach to go from one bank to another, back and forth. Also with injuries, also like, for instance, today if we have to call lines where coaches are called onto the court to make line calls, for example, if there's a dispute or whatever, we have to be there. Like, we have to be in the vicinity to do that. And basically by separating them like that, that makes that impossible. No other courts that I've ever been to, ever in any area, are separated by a distance or a barrier where you can't get from one to the other. Also, secondary, the courts that are there, the 3 at City Hall, although I said they do look very nice from afar, they do have an abnormal amount of pitch to them, which I know, having coached for 15 years in this district, both the boys and the girls, there's a lot of coaches, myself included, where a pitch like that is really unacceptable for tennis play. I mean, it's the courts that are there also have dead spots in them, where what happened with those courts, if you put a standard overlay over the courts, basically you put a mesh or an acrylic over top after you've sealed the cracks, and sometimes that acrylic will lift in places. So wherever the acrylic lifts on the court, you have dead spots. So wherever the ball bounces, where the acrylic is lifted, you have a dead zone. So in a matter of play, having a competitive team such as that we do, when you get to that level, that is a surprisingly, or not surprisingly, it's a big deal. Like, that's a big problem. And I know there's other coaches that are very nitpicky about things such as net height, for that matter, so they would definitely have issues with playing on those courts. The parents and myself and Jeff and all of us, as I knew going into this, we were all in agreement, and we had a meeting yesterday to discuss the options, and we're in agreement that of the options that I sat through with Chris and Mark Maslona as well, I attended both meetings with both contractors that came out. The first contractor gave the option of resurface, okay? The courts back in 09 or 10, they basically were done where you seal the cracks, you cover it up with an overlay, and there's no asphalt added. You just paint it, and it looks nice, and you cross your fingers and hope that it works. And generally an overlay of that type, that's the cheaper option, and the standard on that in our climate is that it'll last about 5 years, and we're at year 9 or 10 out of that, okay, which is okay. Our courts are 30 plus years old at least out there, and with the freeze and thaw that you have, there comes a time, and there's been many schools in our district where this must be the time to replace courts, which many of them have done to varying degrees. I've seen some that have done the asphalt overlay. I've seen many of them that do the complete overhaul of the courts, because when you compare an overlay, which Chris and I mean, when I was there, I learned a lot. It was good. We asked good questions and everything. But the overlay with the asphalt, it's cheaper than a complete rebuild, okay? With that, however, generally you're not going to get a guarantee on that, okay? That will last usually 5 years, maybe 10 if you're lucky, okay? But eventually it's going to crack to a point where it's going to show again. To what degree, it depends. I mean, you never know. We also met with Vasco directly, and the gentleman that came out from Vasco, he had 2 recommendations that we can go through, which the first recommendation was that we can do an overhaul in the court, completely redo the courts at the site where they're at currently, where you take out all fencing, all posts, dig everything out down to the base, and you relay everything, just like brand new courts. And the estimate that he gave for that was roughly around $3 to $325 to do all of that. He also gave another option that saves money, where you leave all of the fencing in place that's already there, and inside the perimeter of the courts, basically parallel to the fencing, you saw cut all the way down to the base, leaving the fencing in place, leaving the alleyway in place. It's between the banks of courts. You pull all that material out, and then you relay it completely, okay? Which gives you a new court surface, okay? Fences stay, all of that stays, but you get what's most important, which is ultimately the court surface. That's what our issue is. So the price for that, he had said, was around $225. Like as a verbal estimate, $225 for that. He also said if you wanted to do fencing, fencing would be about $40K, okay? He also said with drainage could be about $25K. If you want to tie up the drainage and fix that up in any way, putting the drains around the courts, which would be a good thing to do. With the options that we have, generally, regardless of which of those two would be chosen, to do the cheaper option or the more expensive option from Vasco, redoing the surface completely, courts, I think they gave a 5-year warranty on both of those, I believe. However, courts, when you redo courts, generally you get a 20 to 25-year lifespan out of them when you do them that way, okay? So your insurance policy, no company is going to give you more than 5 years, which they gave, which is, I mean, I think personally that's generous, that's nice, but 25 years, I mean, we got 30 plus years out of our courts that we have now without any huge renovations being done to them. But after talking with the parents and everything last night, my thoughts, Jeff's thoughts, as we said, I mean, rather than spend money on an overlay, which could last 5 years or so, where you put in 100K, 125K, whatever that was with the estimate, you could put in 225 up to 3, and you could have them done where that's going to last, or it should last, I mean, for 20, 25 years. So we are not going through the same scenario 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So it's basically you put in more money, but it's done right. Now, one of the things that he mentioned, and Chris, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on anything, but he said, well, if you do the cutting around the perimeter and lay down new court surface, eventually where you have cut around the edges, that crack will open up over time to a degree, okay? He said it shouldn't be anything major because it's just a saw cut that's there. But the crack could open up. I mean, it could open up after a couple years or whatever. But the thing is that the crack where it would open is out of the playing surface completely. It's right against the fence. It's within about a foot or so of the fence. And he said typically what districts do with that is they can fill the crack in and then just paint around the crack every so often, which isn't expensive at all, or some districts just leave it because it's not a nuisance, it's not a problem, anything like that. So basically with the options and things like that, the parents and I and everything, we don't think that the overlay, either of the overlay types, because there's two types of overlay, the cheaper one and the one with the asphalt, which adds more life to it. We've decided that going with new courts is the best option, and the parents, they do want to fundraise. I know Sue, for example, started fundraising with USTA. She's filling out the paperwork and everything. USTA funding, they give, it's dependent upon your number of courts that you have. If for 5 courts, they'll give you up to $50,000, okay? I don't know of any schools that have gotten $50,000. Like that's a dream to get that amount. Typically, the schools that I've talked to get between like 15 and 25 to help with their courts, okay? Could we get it? Yes, but I doubt, because part of the things they deal with are like affluence and within your district and all different types of factors, which I know we don't fall into those categories, but we can go for it and try. And I know the parents, they're willing to fundraise for this. I'm willing, Jeff is willing. I know the kids would be active with that. Because in our eyes, even though we realize, and we all discussed this, that this could mean doing the same thing that we did last year, where we're playing our matches on the road, at least for the boys' season, depending on, I mean, we could get lucky and the courts are playable here with the crack seals that they did. I mean, that might be possible if nothing's done in the meantime. But we are willing to play matches on the road knowing that we're investing the money, we're saving the money, and we're putting it towards doing the courts how they should be done. And they're kept somewhere in the home campus there, preferably where they're at. And that's pretty much, there was no, when we all met yesterday, there were no dissenters to that. We all are in 100% agreement that those are our two options. And we figured between the two, like if it's 300 to 325 versus 225, I mean, some of the parents said, okay, let's aim high. I mean, why not? And see what we can fundraise, see what we can put together. And if we can do it, we can do it. If we can't, then the cheaper option is available, and we get the surface. The surface is what's key. I mean, that's what we need. And if you're looking for an insurance policy on it and things like that, which, I mean, it's hard to get. Those courts, they should last that amount, and it all falls back, like Chris had said too, and I heard this too from both estimators. Core samples at the site, we have to see what the core samples come back as. Me personally, and both estimators say that it looks good there. The site looks good, it looks stable, everything looks fine. There's no shifting really, there's no heaving, there's nothing, and that was done when they added the drains in 10 years ago before they put the overlay on. Prior to putting the drain in down the center alley, we had seepage that would come up through the courts. Okay, during hot days it would seep and we'd have water. Ever since they put that in, we've had no seepage on those courts whatsoever. They drain well. When it rains, we roll them and they dry. So it's a good thing now. So me personally, I mean, I've seen many tennis courts and I'm not an engineer, but I know Chris has talked to them, I've talked to them, and depending on the core samples coming back fine, which I personally think they will, then I think that's the way that we'd like to proceed with everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Reynolds?
Can I ask one for Chris? Are we sure that drainage doesn't need upgrading? Because all I've ever heard is you're next to that big parking line. So that water has to go somewhere, and a lot of it goes to the courts. And if we're going to redo those courts, boy, you don't want.
So, and again, to get into the pricing is very different. So drainage should be a part of the specification. I think to Dan's point, the drainage as it stands today is working. What you would hate to do is invest and replace the courts in their entirety and have the drainage fail. So yes, there would need to be an investigation to ensure the drainage is functioning correctly. Similar to what you're doing with the base, you know, to pull cores out of the base to make sure the base is good. So
To me, that would be the one thing you really have to be careful there, because you know, really bad rain and everything else, it's got nowhere else to go other than to those tennis courts and then down.
as I've communicated there, so if we do something other than full replacement, correction of drainage and fencing, what we do is we take on some risk that one of those items that we don't address in a project becomes a problem in the short term.
Now, Chris, is that one of the things that when he mentioned when we were there, the 25,000 for drainage, is that something, putting drains around the courts, is like the French drains?
So what he was referencing was what he could see where the gravel was.
Okay.
The larger concern that we've had the engineers looking at, and we haven't got our study yet, is what's going on with all the water that's flowing off in the parking lots. If you recall the problem at the one pole where they put the electrical feeder in and there's that wash there, we need to understand what's going on because there's a lot of water you can see where it's eroded an area over by the tennis courts. Again, that would be something that
just got to make sure you redirect it.
That would be something that you would want to make sure is addressed as part of the investment because there's clearly something going on there and it's going to take an engineer to say how many gallons of water, how to divert that water so so that it doesn't get underneath the courts. And I think Dan's right. I mean, the contractors were very clear in saying that there's no deflection in the surface, so there's nothing raising. The fence footers are heaved a little bit, so that's evidence of some moisture underneath. But Dan, you know, he's got a significantly longer history than I have, and he says they've actually gone down. The footers have actually settled since the drainage was put in a few years ago.
Yeah, the footers, when they redid everything in 09, 10, when they did that layer, they took all the fence posts out. The fencing, they took all of that out, and they reset it because our footers were up by about 3, 4, 5 inches with those posts. And then since they put the drainage in, because they did the drainage first, and they said, we're gonna do this before we paint them and put the overlay to make sure we're not getting seepage. And then we had to watch them to make sure there was no seepage, and there wasn't. And I mean, the drainage they put in has been magical because they used to seep pretty badly, and those poles were heaved. And I mean, probably the highest heaving of the pole, of 1 or 2 of them out there, is like less than an inch. I mean, it's not high, and the rest of them are set pretty good. So that's the water. I think it's getting and it's flowing where it should be and going to where it should be, from what I've seen for all these years that I've been out there.
So my recommendation to the board is we need to let the engineers complete their study. We have to know what the core samples are of the sub-base, and we need to actually verify that drainage, to your question, is sufficient for what we're seeing coming off the market.
Because if there's a lot of stuff washing out from underneath them, all of a sudden you get catastrophic things happening. It isn't necessarily something that will happen real slowly, but it can be prevented. It just, you have to make sure that the drain.
What kind of timing are we looking at?
We're on a real short timeline if we go that direction. I mean, we had a plan in place to put the tennis courts at the city, to have a timeline to facilitate tennis next year. If we choose to go this direction, we need to develop a specification for this kind of renovation and a new budget estimate for the 5 courts. Well, we had that at $500,000 to include completely redoing the drainage over there. I think that was Vasco that provided that estimate.
That was Vasco through our CMR process.
Yep.
You know, I just wanted to give you additional information. You know, we're required to go through any type of building project through a couple of models, and so it has to be, this project has to be bid. While we went out and got some quotes to give ourselves a ballpark, you know, based on timing of fundraising and when those funds that the tennis parents graciously raised for these courts, at that time of bid, the costs could look different. We also have to bid it or decide to go through a CMR, however the board decides to do that. You're going to add additional costs going through the CMR, and if it's out to bid, just because you've got this one estimate doesn't mean that that's what the bids are going to come in. And if we decide to go the bid route, we have to accept lowest bid, which could be higher than what was quoted. So just information to you know, that just because we have what is deemed to be a price today may not be what the price is tomorrow should we delay and have to go through one of those 2 processes.
And the other part of that, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the CMR quote, if it comes in under that, the money comes back. It doesn't stay
Correct.
with the manager. So yeah, that number's going to look bigger. They're going to give themselves some room, as you might expect. But if it ends up coming in below that, which you know they gave some room, that does come back to the district. So what it's worth, the numbers probably aren't as far apart as they look to be right now, but still, it might be best to do it. Chris, you can figure out what you want to do with it.
Well, I think that, I mean, the whole CMR approach, that was all done to fast track. That was all done to expedite, to try to get the spring season, to salvage the spring season. So I think we all understood that that was probably not the most economically attractive model, but it got us the best chance to salvage spring if you went with the 2 part option. So, but Dan, let me ask, so the 3 to 3 1/4, is that, I know Vasco is just kind of a ballpark kind of thing, but so is that considered a complete rebuild? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean,
you also talked about a rebuild, like you said, Vasco gave 2 options, and then you referred to a complete rebuild. So I'm just trying to understand.
Like
I understand the carve out, and then the other for 2 1/4, and then 3 to 3 1/4 was where they take it down and build it all back up.
Everything, like a complete
So is
rebuild.
that's considered a complete rebuild?
That's considered, when you take the fencing out, when you take the posts, like the net posts, everything, and you just go down to the base and lay it all down, including the alleyway between the courts and everything. I mean, is that, Chris, is that correct? That's what I heard, 3 to 325 for.
Vasco did throw 3 to 325 number out there. That is correct. My only concern, and I've shared it a couple times, is I'm not sure what $325,000 is buying, because it was a verbal conversation that we were having, and so when he says he's replacing the entire courts, is that to our specifications? And what's the cost? Because we're going to write a specification and it's going to be detailed, and it's going to make sure that we get the 20 plus years out of the courts. And then we'll public bid it, and then obviously that will drive price, and we hope that drives price down if we're out early. But we don't know that 325 is buying us
Everything
that we want.
Right. And do both of those options, the 225 and 3 1/4 that Vasco kind of ballpark, do those have 5-year guarantees with them?
I believe so.
Yes, they
I
do.
believe so.
I had never heard the 225 scenario before. It's the first time I'd ever heard that from any tennis court, and I've installed, this will be my 4th set of tennis courts. I'd never heard that done before. I'm not sure that I would accept leaving the old fences. That's not up to me. But it would certainly address the immediate problem and provide extended life for the courts, because it is a full replacement just inside the fencing. So everything else stays.
Right. So I guess part of the question is, and you know, we've been talking about tennis courts for a year, probably at least more, if not more. And I know that, you know, some of the past conversations that we've had on it, you know, we've gotten ballpark numbers. So we've talked to PDA, right, who is our architect, and, you know, they talked about, you know, looking at the site and having concerns about some of the drainage, right? And they threw out, and again, this was just an estimate, but back a while ago, they talked about 70 to 90 grand a quarter was their ballpark estimate. That wasn't tied to a CMR model or a bid process. It was just a range. And then when they looked at the course more closely, at least my recollections, anybody jump in and if you remember differently, they said it's going to be on the higher end. So when we were kind of looking at what our options were, we were thinking 90 times 5 is 450, right? And then you've got some drainage in there on top of it. And so when the estimate came back under the CMR model for 586, right? I mean, we understood that there was some fluff in there for the CMR model, but I mean, 3 to 3 1/4 to 580, you're almost 2x, you know, and so, and that's like maybe to Chris's point too, is what are we actually getting for 3 1/4? So, so you know, we're getting a pretty significant range of disparity with, I know some of this stuff has just been ballpark too, right? It hasn't been, other than Shook's CMR bid, which was very specifically, which is where you ended up at the high end. So it's great that the tennis community is willing to pay some short-term sacrifice on the courts, meaning, you know, kind of give you know, more runway. But so what happens if, okay, we go out to bid, and I know you're obligated to accept the lowest bid, but Chris, refresh my memory. If you went out to bid and you're thinking you're going to come in the 300 range and it comes in the 500 range, you don't have to take it, right? I mean, can you pull back, or what is our?
So actually, you have to throw, the law would require the bids be thrown out if they come in that far over. So
but
we
you
have,
set
we have an
parameters
estimate
going into the bidding process, saying
if we
kind
go
of like
into
an
the bidding
auction that
process,
says a minimum bid, like but it's a max. Like we're not expecting to pay more than 350, and if all the bids come in over, then we can throw them all out.
Yes, you have to. You'd have to throw them out and rebid.
So when you go into a bidding process, is that standard protocol to establish a ceiling?
Yes.
Okay.
There has to be a budget estimate.
Okay. And how does one establish a ceiling?
The same way that Dan and I have started, talking with contractors, and the architects are going to do, they'll do the exact same thing, and they'll meet with reputable installation, and they'll develop a spec, and they'll say, because it's all the same people, contractors doing this, and so they'll contact them, and they'll talk about how much did it cost you to do the courts last year, and these courts, because the architects know, and that's how they'll establish the price.
So the process from here for us to go forward, if we pull the plug on the city court saying, okay, we're just, you know, that we don't want to do that. We want to buy ourselves more runway and try to redo the courts on campus. So we can suspend the effort at the city, and then we got to get the core samples back.
Yes.
Is there a broader engineering study that comes back with it too?
We would need to have both of those completed and the architect develop a specification with a budget estimate to bring to the board for approval to go to bid.
Okay. So again, do we have to have, because the architect's going to cost money to do that? So is that because that's going to add to the cost? Yes. Is there an option to not use an architect and just go right to a reputable tennis contractor and say, can you do this without an architect, or do you need the specification for the bidding process?
There is a hybrid model, and actually Vasco shared that with us, and it's a government consortium bid program. I would not recommend that. I think you assume basically the district assumes all the risk if you do a project like that. They did share with us that it was Canton. Wasn't it Canton?
One of the city courts down there.
Kansas City had just done that program. My conversation in regards to that was how it's 400 pages of written specification that they would hand to us. We would still need to go out and get an expert to help decipher it for us to ensure that what's 400 pages of specification. Okay, so the state of Florida went out. They did bid spec for tennis courts, or I'm not sure what state. And then they take that specification and they nationalize it and put it into a consortium program to where other schools, universities, and government entities can use that bid specification to procure tennis courts or bleachers, or you name it. They're out the roofing. We used a component of that for the baseball bleachers a year ago, just because it drives pricing down.
So again, so the process, if we suspend the effort at the city, and you know the board was going to spend $250 over there, right, up to $250. So if you say, okay, there's $250 in the pot for new rebuild, let's just say. We get the engineering report, the soil sample comes back, and get the architect to spec it all out, and then you go through what then, a sense of a bidding? I mean, you're not ready to go out to bid because we'll have a funding gap, we won't have all the money, but would we then take that to go out and like ballpark it, like where do we think we're at?
Okay, so the board cannot authorize me to go to bid without a funding apparatus in place. Okay.
Understood.
So
but can you get an estimate though after you do the spec? Because what we're hearing is $325, but we don't know what we're getting.
The architect will produce that.
Okay, so the architect, after they do the full spec,
they'll have it. They're required to provide us an estimate.
Did they do that for the? Sorry. Did they do that for the 586 bid we got from Shook? So isn't that already done then?
The 586
for the rebuild of the 5 courts.
There are quite a bit of those layers of administrative and contingency from the construction manager to fast track it. But yes, we could pull that in redlining.
But I mean, the spec is the architect's spec. Can we
Just use
we
it for
reuse
bids.
that architect
Yes.
spec that's already, we already
Yes.
paid for it,
Yes.
right?
For us, everything.
Yes.
So can't we use that and roll in, back into, okay, now, really, would it just be going back to TDA if they already did the work and saying?
So the
give us
the only thing that TDA would have to wait for is the core samples to come back and the engineering study on the water flow, and that would have to be incorporated.
And, okay, so the only things that really need to be done would be those two things that you just mentioned. And the timing on that could be pretty quick.
I can't speak for TDA, but that's a fair assumption.
What's the definition of funding apparatus that has to be in place?
The board there has to be, and I could ask Mr. Scott to address, there has to be funds available to pay for the project before we go to bid. So we have to identify those funds.
Okay.
Meaning we would either, if the TDA came back and said, okay, you know, we think the ceiling is 375, okay, before we would be able to put it out to bid, we would either have to say, we will authorize 375, or we'll authorize 250, and there's fundraising that's gonna cover the delta.
You wouldn't.
Or it would go into an account. John talked about setting up. We'd have to have the money.
We would have,
In
the
hand.
Board of Education would have to pay the 375, and we have to authorize that expenditure. Yes.
Okay. So, board members, we heard from Mr. Reynolds. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are not to go forward as kind as the city of Brecksville was to offer that solution. It just doesn't seem like a good idea. So I think we should start with the soil samples and the engineer report.
Mr. Dozen?
I mean, what we talked about last time was that, you know, the tennis community we need to hear your voice, because if you're willing to buy more runway, you're putting some seasons potentially at risk. And if you're willing to do that, you know, from my perspective, we can take as much runway as you want. I guess what we're, you know, the next step after, if we go down this path, is that we'll get this, you know, we'll get this, the engineering report, the soil sample, we'll get the new specification, we'll see where we're at, and then from there, the bidding, grants, fundraising, whatever, I'm assuming it would be you know, more of a timeline than issue of when can additional funding be secured to be able to, you know, trigger a bid process. Is that how you would see it, Dan?
That's how I would see it. Now, fundraising money, that has to be in place prior to all of this. Like, it all has to be correct. Okay.
Well, I see it as Mrs. Kramer does as well. I have thought the city was a good option, and I'm happy that we all worked together to find out that wasn't the best option. We didn't play tennis. In fact, Mrs. Sabraco has explained it to me several times, like you explained, and we understand that, you know, that setup was not ideal, nor was anybody, nor were any other schools using that setup. So I understand that now, and that's why we got together and figured this out. This board, and I've talked to everybody, we're ready to support you, we're ready to put the $250 aside. Fund, Mr. Scott will open. As this is going on, you can get started. And so that's what you want, you know, that's what we're going to do. And so, and I want to thank the students who are going to sacrifice and for the future. And the parents as well who are going to have to drive. And anything that, you know, from my perspective that we can do to make that easier on you, you need to let us know, because you're looking at the good of the whole, and that's what this community, what makes it great. So thank you.
I agree.
Mr. Segler?
Okay, so as long as when the investment is made, the drainage, and we have the engineering study, we'll know. That to me is my only concern about the existing site. Yeah. It's the only concern I have.
Just one last question. So that saw out option for 2 1/4, does that need the same, Chris, would that need the same specification?
Yes, I would
level?
not recommend, because we want to bid that. we don't, Vasco brought it up, but that doesn't mean others don't do that.
Right.
And we would want to know exactly what they're doing.
Just a quick question on that too. Has Vasco got a good name in the area?
They do. Vasco, for example, they did Hudson's courts, which Hudson has 6 beautiful courts that they redid, I want to say 3, 4, 5 at least years ago. Matt that was out to give the estimate from Vasco said that, I don't know if he mentioned Hudson's cost, but he said Hudson project managed their own building of the courts to save money. So that's, and they've done many courts. Vasco is well known in this area.
Well, then the reason why I asked is, can we use their spec and have others bid against it?
We would, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that would, and
It's
that would
still,
help you steer.
Still required to go through an architect. Unless
You know, they can
use-
review it, but I mean, you know, if we're comfortable that Vasco knows what they're doing.
Yes.
Just got that strong.
Okay, so we have direction. How amazing is this? And I know who's behind the fundraising. I see you guys. We'll move forward. We're going to revisit this. I want to commend everybody on this process. We shared it, right? And we're going to have little plaques for certain individuals all around that thing. Mr. Jin Ho, for sure. All right, we're going to move on. So anything you need, Mr. Scott will help set up that, and everything flows through our treasurer.
No, thank you.
And checks can be made to the Board of Education, so please start donating now. Put in the memorandum, tennis courts, let's go. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, tennis parents.
Tennis players too.
Tennis players, yes.
Yeah, I gotta go work on the grade report.
Not yet, I still got it all good.
So, Mr. Costello, would you like to move up to front, to the hot seat, wow, soon 2 fundraisers. 2 fundraisers in a year. Wow,
I'm on 5 right now. Just
wow.
2. Who does 2?
Your husband's gonna be so happy. All right.
I wouldn't come with you this time.
You guys caught us right there.
So we have item C, our bond refinance discussion. So this started about 3 weeks ago. We were presented a unique opportunity by you, and brought it to our attention that we have an opportunity to refinance our school bond. Things have changed a little bit in those 3 weeks, which you are going to explain to us. We are then hopefully going to provide you with direction, and hopefully, if things look good, we're going to be moving forward with that. So please take it away.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the time tonight. We'll be brief. In our last discussion, I did talk with Mr. Crooks, who called me up and asked me for a brief explanation for some communication, I believe, on the website about how the bond issue was looking. And my concern with him at that point was I didn't want to stipulate a specific savings threshold that was going to be met, specifically because these rates are going to move up and down, and Mr. McGuan has some material as well to talk about that. At that very point when I was talking to Mr. Crooks, we were actually experiencing a real backup in rates, meaning they were coming up. And at one point, when I had presented to the board, those savings levels had been cut in half. Since then, bonds have rallied, so we're almost at those original levels. What I want to stipulate to the board essentially tonight is specifically that as rates move up and down, these figures are going to change on a minute-by-minute basis. But the one thing we want to keep in mind is that 3% threshold of the ratio, net present value savings, as compared to the refinancing issue size, is the benchmark by which we'll make that informed decision on moving forward. And currently now, we went from, I believe, was 14 or 15%, and it came back down. We were down to 8 or 9%, which is still a significant savings opportunity. But now we're back up to, I believe, 10 or 11%.
Yeah, 11%, right.
So, We brought Mr. McGuan, who will be running the books on the transaction. He's with Stifel Nicholas. He's going to be the main underwriter on the transaction, and he's put together some nice material that kind of explains what this phenomenon is. And then to summarize again, this is a taxable refinancing that will reissue the debt that we did last year at lower interest rates. We have to do it taxably because the law does not allow us to refinance those bonds in advance of their prepayment call date tax exempt. That all went away at the end of 2017.
Okay. Austin McGuan with Stifel Nicholas. Good to be with you guys again. I was the lead underwriter on the 2018 transaction. If you take a look at, some of this is probably going to be repetitive to what Mr. Purcell has been talking to you about over the course of the last month. But if you look at the graph or the table on the left there, what we put in there is there's the municipal market data, benchmark interest rate for tax exempt interest rates. If you look at the second column from the left, that's where the rates are today, where that benchmark interest rate is today for all the various maturities going out 30 years. If you go one column over to the right from that, that's where that benchmark interest rate was on the sale date for the 2018 bonds last year. And as you can see, rates have dropped precipitously since that sale date in June of 2018, an average of 95 basis points, so almost a whole percentage point off of where we were in 2018. Bottom right-hand corner is the yield curve. So the typical yield curve is going to be more similar to the dotted line there that we had on the pricing aid for 2018. As you would expect, for lower maturity or earlier maturities, you're going to have lower interest rates. For longer maturities, you're going to have higher interest rates. But since then, that yield curve has flattened significantly, so that you have long-term interest rates that are almost at level with the short-term interest rates. So that's kind of an interesting phenomenon that we're going through right now. If you take a look at the second page, wanted to show a comparison of what, so we have the 10-year municipal market data benchmark interest rate, so that's the tax exempt side. For the taxable side, as Mr. Purcell mentioned, this is going to be a taxable issue. We're going to look at the 10-year U.S. Treasury, which is a taxable interest rate, which is going to be our benchmark. And as you can see, since since August 30th of 2018, when it was the 10-year Treasury was at 3.24%, it has decreased by 152 basis points down to 1.72%. Actually, I think within the last day it's dropped another 9 basis points. So it's really falling off a cliff since the summer of 2018. One of the things that we've talked about is the kind of the recent volatility. So if you take a look at my magnifying glass there and you look down to the bottom right, it shows what's happened recently. So we had the rates declining through August, through the beginning of September, and then we saw that spike basically in mid-September that took away some of our savings. But as Mr. Purcell has mentioned, within the last week or so, we've seen a decrease in about 15 to 20 basis points as those rates have started to go down further. So we saw, I think they attributed that spike to kind of less concern about a trade war, less concern about the economy, but as the geopolitical events like relating to possible impeachment, Brexit, trade war, all that stuff is coming to the forefront. It's driving down rates almost back to where we saw them at the end of August. So that's kind of my spiel on interest rates. Anything to add to that?
No.
Okay.
And as much that this is not the forum in which politics should be discussed, in our unfortunate circumstance as public finance bankers, it is headline risk that drives this situation for us, unfortunately. And this pending inquiry of impeachment is actually good news for interest rates. This is going to definitely increase a significant level of uncertainty in the investing world. Equities will have a flow to safe harbor, which are treasuries. Treasury prices will escalate, which brings their corresponding yields down. So that's what the situation we find ourselves in. Tonight we are asking the board to pass legislation legislation as prepared by John Larson at Squire Patton Boggs to formally move forward with the transaction. So once that legislation's put in place, Mr. Larson will then move forward with, and he's already started a good amount of that, and we'll be in touch with Mr. Scott as well as Ms. Magyar in terms of putting together this disclosure statement. We'll try to make it as quick and as efficient as possible to capture this market, but it is a process that can only go so fast. But that's what we're here for tonight, to answer any additional questions the public may have.
Would you remind me, we're talking about not short-term bonds, but longer term.
That's correct.
Did you refresh my memory?
Certainly. The original issue, and you'll have to remind me, Austin, was, I believe, 35 years?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. The original issue was 35 years, so this will match that maturity. We cannot go any longer by law. We could, in fact, take a look at some of these savings and examine the notion of eliminating some maturities because of all the savings per annum, taking it from 35 possibly to maybe 33 years. But my suggestion to that would be we wait till we are further into the bond issue, start examining whether to take years off, because we would like to see a more formal realization of some of the projected taxable value increases, though very conservative, that we put into the model to begin with. It's a little premature to start lopping off maturities because then we put extra emphasis that those property values were going to escalate. But these are all long-term bonds. They will go out 35 years. And it is indexed off the 10-year treasury now because it is taxed. Does that answer your question, sir?
Aren't we, we're not talking about the first 5 years or the first 10 years bonds. We're talking about bonds that mature after that time.
We are talking about bonds maturing after that first 5 years. So we are looking at refinancing bonds. So that's that's the question. I see where you're going.
Gotcha.
We are looking at refinancing and calling in principal from bonds 12/1, 24, and after, correct?
Right. Yeah, after the call date, if you're gonna, legally, you can't call those bonds in earlier. If you were to escrow those bonds, like put them on the side for the payment of principal and interest on those bonds when it comes due for the non-callable maturities, it cuts into the savings. It wouldn't make economic sense.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no benefit to escrow for bonds that cannot be net funded in an escrow. You have to put away the full amount of principal and interest regardless, but anything after 2023, we can call those bonds in right away. Tell those investors, we're going to take that money now, we're going to invest it up until 2023, and on 12/1/23, we're going to call all those bonds in, and now the new refinancing is going to take their place.
Right, because they're staggered maturities.
Correct.
We didn't sell $44.5 million of 35-year bonds.
No, right.
We sold them in lots,
Right.
chunks.
Serialized maturities.
Right. And
Correct.
so we're not refinancing $44.5 million. I think it was $30 million or something at the end of the day. I mean, it's less.
Yes, it's definitely less than the
Less.
aggregate when we.
And when you say we have to stay at 35 years, it's that 35 years from when we started,
Correct.
2018.
That is
We're
correct.
not adding another year on.
That is absolutely
So-
correct. Thank you for the clarification. We can only go to the final maturity as legislatively passed on the original bond issue.
Right. And so the other question I have is, because of the volatility in rates, are we protected from getting, all the way to the trigger point of selling the bonds and then having something crazy happen? I mean, are we protected from losing money on this deal, so to speak?
You're not, the money you could potentially lose.
Or not saving?
Right. The only money that I would think that this could potentially cost you would be between a negotiation with yourself and Mr. Larson. He would be the only one putting together a legal fee if the transaction were not to go through. All of us, all third party, we work on a transactional basis. Nothing goes through unless the transaction is completed.
Yeah.
And if he were to present a fee to you, it would be a nominal, small fee.
So what you're saying is if we got up to the day where we're ready to sell and whatever, something totally unexpected, or even within a week or whatever, at any point where it's like, oh my gosh, the world has changed,
Right.
interest rates have changed, because all of this is designed to pay less interest over time, which is saving our to save our taxpayers.
Correct.
So we're not getting any additional money. None of these savings come back to us to use for our new building. This is all about restructuring the debt to save our taxpayers money. So obviously, if we get closer to the trigger point and we're not going to be able to achieve the savings we hoped, we can pull the plug on it.
Absolutely.
And you're saying your fees come out of the transaction, so if you don't do the transaction, there's no fee, and then Mr. Larson would have some probably nominal fee for the work he did to prepare it.
That's absolutely correct. That's exactly right.
And I used to be a lawyer, so I used to draft these resolutions.
I'm not with it.
But just to your point, John Larson's put a threshold in here, a savings threshold. So you would have to, it's 3% net present value savings. So we would have to exceed that threshold even to proceed. If we were below that threshold, John Larson's not going to deliver his legal opinion.
Okay.
And if I may put in my own, it's not a legal opinion that we're going to put into this. If this starts to creep down, anything, in my opinion, less than 10%, I'm going to address the board and let you know that we think this is not saving the money that we originally thought, and after 10%, we would have to make an informed decision as to whether to move forward. Again, 3%, it's not a legal benchmark, but it is the guidance by the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, Professional Association. They say 3% net present value, you should be considering it. But seeing as this is a taxable transaction, it's a significant sum of money, and that we're going to be extending the call date now from 5 years to 8 years, because taxable transactions do not work with shorter call dates. We want to make certain this is well worth the effort and the savings for the district. So anytime this thing starts to back up, we have not crossed the Rubicon at this point. We can get all the way up to that actual day that we think we're going to go in the market. So nothing is, you're giving us the green light to legally move forward, but nothing is committed. So you have full flexibility in your decision. It's a good question.
So when we talked, I just want to back up just so that we're talking the same number. So when we talked the other day and we were talking about fees, and when we talked about that legal fee, between John and I, we were quoted anywhere from $75,000 to $80,000. So if you're saying that, you know, if we, up to the point at which we decided not to do this, that it would be a nominal fee, is that the nominal fee you're referring to, that we would get charged the full $75,000 to $80,000? Because that's not nominal.
I would agree with you. That is not a nominal fee. You're absolutely correct. And I cannot speak for Mr. Larson, but generally those fees come associated, and you would speak better to this, with the rendering of an opinion. You would not have to render an opinion if there is no transaction done. So that is something you may want to discuss with Mr. Larson. How much could that fee potentially be if this was to be pulled? So it is a good, very good question.
Because that fee would then not be taken because there would be no transaction.
There would be no transaction.
Okay. Just want to be
We
clear on
do
that.
want to move expeditiously on this so that we avoid that situation for certain, without a doubt. I wish we could all work that way, but again, I'm not a lawyer.
So we don't know the total savings, but you had said originally when we were discussing this, it was upwards for $7 million for our taxpayers,
Yes.
correct?
We have some refreshed figures. They're actually not much lower than what we originally discussed. At one point, they had reduced significantly.
Okay.
Here's what we were looking at originally.
Again, we understand.
Certainly. So originally, when I came to the board with Mr. Larson, we were looking at a transaction that had net present value savings of $7.2 million, which represented a ratio benefit of 16.57%.
Yeah, and then the most recent numbers, which were prepared based on the market yesterday. So since yesterday, the market's gone in our favor by 9 basis points. Achieved net present value savings of $6.3 million, or 14.3% of refunded par.
And that's net present value benefit. The number I like to use that we will share with the voting public and your taxpayers is the aggregate cash flow savings, which on this particular initial transaction was just under $11 million, $10.88 million.
Now we're at 9.3, almost 9.4.
The reason we net present value that back, obviously $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. But the aggregate is really that number that is a significant, that's actual realized cash flow savings. A net present value discount can be kind of loosey-goosey depending upon the interest rate or the discount rate to which you apply that cash flow.
Well, let's get going.
You got it.
Okay.
Mr. Larson's already started a good amount of the work.
Are we still going to, when we sell the bonds, we're going to give our public an opportunity?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we had talked about that. We had talked to last time when we did this.
Mhm.
We had an opportunity to bring our public in,
Yeah.
educate them on the opportunity that would be presented. We'd have a date, a sale date. We had talked about the end of October
Mhm.
is what I remember.
Correct.
Right. But we had talked about that conversation with our public being before that.
Yeah.
So we need to come up with a date where we do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely, yeah. Actually, I always use Rexford Broadview Heights as an example of how that went really well. So if you remember last time when we had the investor meeting, we piggybacked off of TDA's presentation about the elementary school, like plans and everything like that. And we had, I mean, obviously it wasn't a huge number, a huge percentage of the bond issue, and retail's never going to drive the bond issue, but we had a significant retail presence on that transaction. So definitely want to try to replicate, or if not exceed that.
Would you imagine it would be the same in this case?
Yeah, we'll definitely make the same push that we did last time. Yeah.
There may be a little bit less of an attraction
Yeah,
for an
but-
investor because these are taxable.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Okay. So we'll set up that meeting. We'll have that public meeting, and then you'll give them the number. We'll set up a number where people can call in.
absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
know the date. Will we know the date by then of the sale?
So I mean, that's still in flux. I think we're still
Right.
putting together the schedule, so we'll have to coordinate like
Okay.
the sale, the schedule, and when we have the sale dates, so then we can plan the meeting that we're going to have off of that.
Yeah, we'll try to do the investor meeting a good maybe 2 weeks before we actually price the bonds. But at that juncture, we'll have a really solid feel on what the market's doing, where the transaction is, and that'll give everybody plenty of time to ask questions. If they want a prospectus or a preliminary official statement, we can send that to them. We'll establish the 1-800 number. Because I recall on the issue last year, again, echoing Mr. McGuan's sentiment, retail on a transaction at this level will never drive the transaction, but it was a significant portion of retail, one of the larger amount of retail orders that I have ever seen on a school district issue. So it was extremely effective last time. Very, very effective.
Wonderful.
We want to participate in the game.
Yeah. Okay.
The other attraction, though, that it may not be tax exempt, these are definitely going to be higher yields than you can get in the tax exempt market. So there's still a yin and yang situation going there from the investor perspective.
The only other thing, they say they don't want to talk politics, but see if you can beat the Inspector General's report. Depending on what it is.
The whistleblower, doesn't he have to release something in the whistleblower?
Well, the whistleblower things, that'd still be this week, there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
You never, Inspector General could either calm people down
Oh, yeah.
or excite them.
No, you're absolutely right. It's, I've been doing this now 23 years, and up until the recession, I had never ever witnessed the headline risk and volatility of the market based upon what you read or what's put out in the
Right.
public.
Or what comes out as a tweet.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It was very trend-setting type of a certain projectable situation in the fixed income markets. It's almost as volatile as equities right now.
Yeah, it's great.
Heck, in the last
Coming
3-4
from
years, I
other
would say it's
countries, I mean, it's just not even us feeding
Yeah.
it, so it's kind of, it is crazy.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, so we have that a little bit farther down on our agenda if you'd like to go, or just wait to see if it passes. It sounds like it's gonna.
Oh, we'll put it in your fine hands. Whatever
Okay.
the result is, we'll follow your marching orders.
Okay.
So
Two other quick things. Are we okay to scan this and post it
Yeah.
on our? Okay.
Okay.
So Joel, maybe we can scan this and post it in this
Well,
discussion. So
well,
anybody
Or
out
I
there who
can
wants
send you,
Yeah,
you
you
can
can
do
send
like
us
a
the
digital version.
PDF, and then we'll
Much
just
easier.
attach it to this agenda item, so anybody out there who wants to see what
Just
we're
send it to
looking
me,
at.
Okay.
I'll upload it, it's not a problem.
Okay, great.
And then separately on our side, I'd like for somebody to follow up with John Larson and find out what that nominal fee would look like if we have to pull the plug.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing that nominal word to our attention. That's helpful, that conversation. We should.
And also 23 years, one thing I've learned is to never speak for Squire Patton.
Okay, so we're gonna move on. Item 6, other board business.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nothing. We have president's announcements and recognition. I have one announcement. Mr. Gilbride, I promise I'm getting to you. So I apologize, thank you.
Just wake me if I'm snoring.
So, you know, we've been working hard on our mental health initiative, and we get this magazine. I know we all got this from OSBA, our journal, and it was really exciting to me to see that in the biennial budget there was, you know, funds set aside for mental health initiative. And the low end, we would be getting per pupil $20 per pupil is the way I think it reads, or?
They did the initial allocations, and we were getting about $137,000 this year, 140, yes, 140 for next year. So
it goes up even next year.
It's a little bit more the following year, yes. And then those were just finalized. You had sent an email. I apologize, I haven't opened it yet today, but those were just recently finalized, and then we have pull downs in October and in February to receive those funds. Dr. Simstick and Dr. Martin and I and Cabinet have sat down to kind of brainstorm how those funds would be best allocated to support some of the initiatives that are already going on in our district around mental health, but also to be able to add some additional items to our mental health action plan.
That's great. Okay, well, keep us in the loop, and good news finally about funding. Okay, I have nothing else to add. Item 8, community communications. We have hearing of the public. Does anyone wish to be heard? Okay. Item 9, board member committee reports. We have a board member. Let me see. There we go. We have financial liaison audit committee. Permanent Improvement Committee.
We have a meeting scheduled for next month?
Yes, October.
Okay, and we have Board Policy Committee.
Which we done 2 weeks ago.
We did. And Mr. Peterson, do you have anything to characterize it?
There's a lot of law changes and a lot of policy changes following those laws. To be continued.
To be continued. Okay, so we have nothing else. We're going to move to item 10, District Committee Reports. We have Transportation Appeals Committee, Mr. Dozen and Mr. Code. You did have an appeal.
We did have an appeal.
Okay.
Well, we had 2.
You had
but
2.
One person,
They opted not to pursue.
Oh, did they back out?
Okay.
They didn't show up, and then they opted not to pursue it.
So just to reiterate, who's on that committee for the appeals? Not specifically, but like it's made up of a group of people that are not just board members or administrators. We have parent involvement on that committee as well. Is that correct?
I'm going to let Chris speak.
Yes,
to the composition.
we have 2 police officers,
okay.
a board member, a parent, and a bus driver.
Okay. And that a parent will present their situation
they,
after they follow the process. This is their final step. They'll make an appeal. They come before this committee, and then they. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Probably one of the most pleasant parents we've ever worked with at this last appeal.
Okay. Well, I know, and I'm just stating that for the camera because we've had parents ask how that appeal process works. So thank you for entertaining that. We have Cuyahoga Valley Career Center report. Mr. Gilbride, hello.
Thank you all. Pleasure to see you all. I'm happy to report the adult education program actually was cash flow positive for the first time in my tenure there.
Wow.
So I knew you'd be happy to hear that.
Yeah, it's great.
It is very heavily dependent on the nursing program there. So the good news is last year was positive. Enrollment is down this year, so I'll caution that and see if we can pull it off 2 years in a row. The CVC All Board Dinner is coming in October 24th, just as a reminder. Love to see any and all of you there if possible. CVCC is hosting the Regional Health Occupation Students Competition this year. It is February 1st. It's an all-day event, and basically our health occupation students will participate and compete with students from 16 other career centers, and the Top 3 in each competition will advance to the regionals. So that's coming up. I think it's the first time they've done that in quite some time. And then lastly, enrollment numbers are down. We're down about 10 individuals over prior year.
For just this district?
Yes,
Okay.
just this district. So as a percentage of total enrollment, our decrease was greater than the drop in the enrollment over there. So we still are struggling to get our enrollment to the level that I think we'd all like to see it. The special needs was increased by 33%, so we are getting value at that end of the spectrum. So we still have some work to do to increase that enrollment over there.
Any ideas of what we should do? Any discussions? that the
Yeah,
board
I
is
think it's
having?
just communication needs to continue to improve. CVCC is making strides on presenting what I believe are more appealing programs to our population. I think we need to increase the communication to the parents in general. Like it or not, the career centers have a stigma attached to them a lot of times, and I think parents are not aware of the benefits of what kids can get over there. My understanding is that the decisions on who goes comes out of the district, and so I think that communication between CVCC and the district just needs to continue to improve. The strategic, go ahead.
Well, I would just say, I've heard such positive feedback in the last month for students that have been going to CVCC on behalf of our parents, and what an amazing, is that they're almost surprised. They expect, it's an odd, and they said they didn't know their children would love it as much as they did.
Right.
And so I'm wondering why, why that reaction, because some of us know how amazing it is. And so like you said, back to your point, that communication is
Right. Well,
not
I will even confess myself, I don't think I'd ever walked in the building
Right.
until I volunteered to participate at this level.
And it's right
So
there.
I don't think the community recognizes the resource that we have right at our back door. No question about it. And the other thing that I would tell you in my observation, and you folks know it, but kids learn in a different way. We all have been, my generation has been brainwashed that college is the only answer, and frankly, it's not. And if we give kids the opportunity to get their hands involved, sometimes some kids that are struggling really find their stride. So it's been a very eye-opening experience from my perspective.
Well, we are trying on our ends. I hope that you relay to the other, board members over there with, graduation here, trying to make it. We do need more help. We do need, different programs presented to us. We have asked for that before. We've asked for satellites before, as I've conveyed to you. And, we've been only met with resistance. So.
Well, and unfortunately, the satellite situation, from a fiscal perspective, doesn't make sense over there. I know it's what this district in particular would like, but if you look at it in the whole program, it's very difficult for them to find for us to find that kind of funding over there.
But unfortunately, and I'm just going to say this, from a fiscal perspective, it doesn't make sense that our taxpayers are paying as much as they do per pupil and not getting anywhere near that value. So that's really, the problem. My heart, I understand that side, but I'm representing these taxpayers, and I hope you relay that I don't feel like this board has changed its mind that we're not getting what we should be getting. And so I just would like you to please convey that, because I know I have some other comrades over there who also have the same feeling still, that they too are not getting that. So our enrollments dropping. We expect to have, a partnership that is working with Mrs. Magyar to come up with a solution, because this is continuing to get worse, as you know.
This is understand message heard. Yes.
This is just an idea. I called you in July, if you remember. I was at a salon. I got my hair cut, and the person who cut my hair had gone to the vocational school in Parma. And she went on and on and on about how great her experience was, and she was so happy that she did it. And she still might go to college, but she wasn't ready to go right. I mean, and she was just but she was a very enthusiastic advocate for the program in Parma. And I felt like if we could get maybe some former students from this district who had had a really good experience at CVCC to come back and talk to, you know, current students, current freshmen and sophomore, they might have more of an impact than some adult coming in and talking to them. But this young lady was just, I wanted her to do a commercial for CVCC because she spoke so highly.
And we have some students that are going there. They love it. It's amazing. Their parents, they get the relevance of it. So who better to be doing these testimonials? But we have got, this is so many years of me like saying the same thing, and you know that. I am passionate about this, and enough already. And so please.
The other perspective of that though is, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I mean, by law, we've already agreed to buy so much, right? And so we're not sending enough. Part of our issue is we've got to sell the value that's there. And I think a lot of the reason why kids aren't going isn't necessarily because of the kid, because of the parents. And we've talked about that before.
Right.
I'm not saying that I know the right way to come at the parents, but I think, you know, that's a longer thing. I think it has to start with kids, maybe middle school, maybe before that, you know, and this sounds funny, but that Mike, whatever the heck his name is, that used to be the dirtiest jobs in the world on TV, and now he runs an organization that tries to encourage kids to consider alternative career paths. I mean, something like that where you get somebody in early in the year to the middle school, maybe parents, just to say, you know, consider this as your kid's going on, and try to expose them, you know, a little bit more of this, because your child might be the best hairdresser in the world, might be a pneumatics genius, might, who knows, but at least when we start getting into the minds of the parents, that it's not a you know, scarlet letter vocation, you know, because you're not going to college. Like you say,
but they can earn college credits. I mean, you can get college credits over there, and that's the kind of stuff that our parents don't know, quite frankly, is what happens after my child goes to the Career Center? What are their pathways after that? And that's a big thing that Dave and Mr. Mangus over there has been working on, is really clarifying that information and trying to communicate that significantly better than we have in the past.
And so we may be able to do that here too. I mean, I went to the signing day last year for the kids, and they were, you know, a real enthusiastic bunch of kids, and they were looking forward to, you know, to jobs after CVCC.
You want to give a comment?
I do. My children are young. They're 8 and 11, so we're not at this point yet. And we've saved $529, so I think we're in a good position for college. But I also think that, like, if we get to that point and they're not college kids, like, I'm fine with trades, so I'm kind of on the same side of this. But I think to communicate this, in my opinion, to parents might be to make it as a larger conversation, like debt, you know, the debt of going to college. And then this is another alternative. And, like, having that top down, going to parents, you know, about these are your options, this is what you need to do to, you know, apply for grants, stuff like that, helping parents go through the system. We are in a different kind of, you know, district where there's more, you know, affluence, and so many people might already get it, but some might not. So if there's a larger conversation, that might be an avenue for selling it.
Yeah, we did it last year, if you recall. We partnered with the Broadview Heights Chamber, and we did a 4-part TED Talk series where Steve and Oz talked about just that topic, and then we had somebody from ODE come in and talk about the programs and, you know, just the different apprenticeships that are available for our kids, and then we had somebody else come and talk just about other opportunities in engineering. We had local businesses come and talk about, look, I'll hire our high school kids right out of school and provide all the. We had 12 parents that showed up. So, you know, I agree. It's getting to the parents, it's not the kids. It's starting that conversation, but it's a conversation that I think even if we put it out in advertising, our parents don't want to hear it. And so we made it part of our strategic plan to figure out strategies on how we can engage parents around this topic, you know, over the next 5 years, because we know from our chairs where the jobs are, what the job market is looking like, and we also know the number of kids who are graduating from college and they're living in their parents' basement with large sums of student debt. I know. I do not want to. I have a kid living in my basement, only in the summer. But no, but trying to have that conversation about, the realities of student college debt when kids graduate is astronomical compared to what it was, possibly when we were in school, where you come out with $20,000, kids are coming out with 50 and 60, and how do you pay that back if you're going to a job that you're making 30 because you went to college instead of looking at another avenue? So we are developing a plan on how to start educating our parents. It's not something we haven't talked about because we see the trends. The signing day was a part of that. We recognized the kids at graduation too. We had them all stand up and just try to really bring awareness to there are other pathways out there, and how do we get parents to buy into it. I'm going to work with PSO a little bit on trying to figure out a way that we can get that messaging out too.
Yeah, I think if it's like offered as like a discrete, yes, meetings and stuff, but if it's a discrete opportunity for learning, I think maybe parents can secretly go online and learn all the things they need to know without feeling.
It's been a tough sell.
Yeah.
Well, even the owner of Conrad's, I met him, it was an outreach, but he was the owner of it. He said, I've never laid anybody off in 40 years. He said, but I can't. I used to have mothers groups go and do field trips here, and they no longer want to come. He goes, if they came and saw what this was, he goes, they would understand this isn't the way it used to be. So he and I had talked about it. We used to have this Vision 8 meeting, which I don't know if we still continue, where we met with the business owners here in Brecksville, Broadview Heights, and we brought them in and they would talk with our former superintendent. She would do this in every community, and it was very much a point that we need to start younger. If the kids really want to do that, they'll drive the parents listen, and the parents event, they will listen to them, of course. And so the thing is we're not hitting them young enough. They've already made their decisions by the time we put them on that bus to go do the visitation over at CBCC. So we need to get it like on the playgrounds. Like he's like, could I do something? Could I bring something? So that's another outreach thing. We need to work with our PSOs, as Mrs. Magyar said, to come up with ideas for Caterpillar and all these other groups around us that are hiring, that never lay off, and get them into the playgrounds with these fun things that the kids can play with.
Well, career days too, I think might be an opportunity to if someone's not stepping up, then maybe reaching out and pulling those people in would be.
Okay. Well, it's in our strategic vision, so we're going to keep on driving it, and it's not off our radar, nor ever has it been. I know because I never stop on that one. We also had a conversation as well, just because you're here, we had a forum with our special ed parents, and Mrs. Magyar is going to be meeting with you about something that they had brought up.
You had made mention of it, and
yes.
You sent me a text and I just did not respond, and I apologize for that.
So we have something that needs
when
to
you're
come
ready,
up as well.
you know where to find me. Yeah.
And I just want to acknowledge, we aren't on the president's report. We had a very wonderful turnout. Over, I'd say about 20 parents came today, and Mrs. Kramer, myself, and Mrs. Magyar listened. We are trying to make our special education program better. We're trying to make it what our special ed parents want. We're trying to put some things back we used to have, where parents could meet and share ideas. Mrs. Magyar did an amazing job this last month on even making changes in our current program, and it was a wonderful process that is not done, and we recognize that, and we're going to continue on working on that. So our special ed program which it is amazing, but it's even more amazing than it currently is. Mrs. Allies here, so she hears, and I always get Quest and Pace. Quest was that group that used to exist.
I think we were Quest, yeah.
Yeah, so we had talked about maybe an idea of putting something like Quest back that's parent-driven, and that existed about 10 years ago. So that's one of the ideas that's coming up on a website where parents can find resources. And
that was awesome. Actually, it was many years ago. We had even teachers who would go to the meetings and they could ask us questions, and it really was a good meeting. I don't know why it fell apart.
Well, one of the founding board members was here, and it was just the same thing that had happened with the PSOs, where people just stopped coming after a while, the attendance. So maybe making them quarterly, or or pairing with another. But they were interested in that idea, so that's something that's hopefully going to be reworked because they feel like they're all going to different things and it's all over the place, so they want a place to house these ideas and get educated together on certain things.
The teachers about that too.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
We all want the same thing.
We do. Thank you.
Okay.
So, out of the districts that feed into CVCC, how many of them send their students in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade for an on-campus visit?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I'll find out. I'd be happy to.
Because I know we used to do that.
What are you talking about, an enrollment?
Are we still doing that? Okay.
Yeah, I
And
know.
when do we do that? Is that 9th grade? Or?
We go, we take them in 10th grade. I believe we're taking kids at the middle school, 8th grade. 10th grade, we take them again. It was stopped for a period of time under previous high school administration. It was brought back, I believe, 2 years ago was the first year we've done it. So we've re-implemented taking the 10th grade over to CVCC.
Is that a volunteer or is that a voluntold opportunity?
So I'm going to have to, I will circle back with the administration. When it was first going on, it was, you need to go see CVCC. And I said, absolutely not. We have to offer this opportunity to all students. And so when we brought it back, I said, all the 10th grade has to go. I'm going to assume that they did that again this past year as well, but I have to go.
Everybody got a permission slip.
I have to just check on that.
Do you need to go?
But it was stopped for a while and we brought it back.
I'm curious though, because that, I would think if those visits started back up, I mean, even though parents are a big driver in this, you know, for the students themselves to actually see it, you know, I would imagine that for some, that could open their eyes and they would be the best advocate back to their parents to say, look, this is something that.
No, I think that's absolutely needs to happen. And I'll double check for you, get you those numbers. Happy to.
Yeah, because they used to give us that enrollment and everything. We don't get that chart anymore. We used to send it
It
out.
just came out and
Okay.
they're doing the retention, so once those both come out, I'll make sure they're sent. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbride.
No, it's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thanks. We have safety and security meeting report.
It was on, the meeting was on September 12th.
Yeah, we had a great meeting. So we talked a little bit about our upcoming active shooter drill that we're having at the high school.
Active shooter. I won't get into that yet.
We also had a thorough review by TDA of the elementary school security systems. I didn't believe they would be followed up with.
No,
So we're gonna, the door locks, is that coming?
Yeah.
We sent that to you.
Yeah, I can't remember when we were gonna read it. Okay. I apologize.
So TDA, they're coming bigger picture, just to give you another update on the building, which is included. We had sent you the specs through courier on the door, on the specific.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. School foundation report.
We had a really good meeting. It looks like they're going to move forward with a customer relationship management software package. And I think this is important because if there's turnover, there'll be a system in place to handle donations, memberships, event registration, online store orders, communication data all in one system. So it looks like they're going to be moving forward with that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did we do hearing of the public?
Yes.
Nobody had anything.
Oh, people were yelling at us. Where
No,
are you?
no, because last month we
Hey, what are you doing? Let that go, all right? You need to let that go. Why are you doing that? All right, moving on. We have our PSO report.
Well, the PSOs kicked off the year with a bang, and at each of the buildings, they're all hard at work fundraising and doing the things that PSOs do. But in addition to that, I wanted to show everybody hot off the press. This is a joint sponsoring of the Cleveland Orchestra Youth Orchestra by the Brexville Kiwanis. And I can switch hats for 1 second and let everybody know that I'm a Kiwanian, and you can get tickets to this excellent presentation from me or from the website, the middle school PSO website, bbhmiddleschoolpso.com. The performance is November 11th, 7 p.m. And please go to the website and get your tickets. I expect to see the high school auditorium sell out. And I'll do everything I can to make sure that happens.
We're going to be in Columbus at the state.
Ah, what?
Nice job.
That's the Capitol Conference.
Well, maybe I'll just have to come back.
You said your doppelganger. I've met him before.
Anyway,
Can we put that in as a
please,
PDF
everybody, get your tickets right from the website or from any Kiwanian.
All right.
And that's my report.
It's wonderful. Okay, moving ahead. Okay, we have other board member reports. No. 12, superintendent's consent agenda. We have A, certified recommendations, B, classified recommendations, C, supplemental recommendations, D, approval of superintendent's consent agenda. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comment?
Any questions on the board?
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Dolson?
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. And do you have to say Mr. Ziegler?
No, he's not here.
Okay. Item 13, I'm being like Mark now. Item 13, superintendent's office. A, College Now of Greater Cleveland. B, boys basketball Christmas trip. C, donations. D, recognition by board of the Bees Wrestling Club. E, Parksville Broadview Heights Middle School fire alarm resolution. F, PSI contract. G, America's Best Transportation. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, comment?
Did I meet your requirement? Did you get the additional information that I put in on those two things?
I did.
Are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions about any of the items outside of the notes that were put into your? Okay.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Dolson?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. Item 14, Treasurer's Consent Agenda. We have A, Financial Report, August 2019. B, Minutes, July 30th, August 28th, September 4th, and September 12th. C, Funding of Buses. D, Advance Money. E, Bond Refinancing. F, Boss Contract Resolution. G, Foundation Grants. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, comments?
The only comment, if there's any questions, I'll entertain any questions. The financial report is on the website, ocom.com. But I am working with Mark. Financial statement is different than what you've had in the past, but the information I'm giving you is appropriate for you to have that type of information. But I am working on, today I think I got a document in the mail because he wants to be able to track the 5-year forecast, and that I will be working on.
So you got PFR, you said PFR is working on that?
Well, they sent it to me today, I just haven't had time to read it.
Okay, and we have the bond refinancing, which we are about to vote on as well. Okay. Anything else? Okay, roll call.
Mr. Dolson?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. Item 15, closing items. A, adjournment. B, announcements. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Any?
Next meeting is October. We moved it again to Tuesday night in October.
That's correct. Thank you.
So October 22nd.
Yes.
Thank you. I just couldn't remember the date.
So October 22nd, and we need to set up a meeting for that public education for the bond. Is that correct?
We're going to
After-
another timeline to see when we can get that
Right.
paperwork. So if not, but we will set up, not that meeting, it's going to be at the November meeting with TDA coming for an update on
Okay.
where we are with right before the GMP.
But that bond will be before October 22nd.
We don't know that.
We don't.
Because
I thought
we don't
the sale
know,
was under-
they have to go through the rating and get all those paperwork
okay.
filed after you've
Okay.
pushed this resolution, so
Okay.
we don't know. But I will work with them and John will work with them to figure out if we can do it before then.
Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call?
Mr. Dolson?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mrs. Kramer?
Yes.
Mrs. Mack?
Yes. We're now adjourned. Sorry I confused you.